The video spread like wildfire across social media. Shaky phone footage from a security camera. A young man, maybe 25, running desperately toward a parked police cruiser. His movements were frantic, purposeful. He smashed the driver's side window with his elbow, cutting himself in the process. Blood dripped onto the asphalt as he climbed inside. The engine roared to life, and he drove off into the night, leaving behind only broken glass and 1,000 questions. Within hours, the footage had been shared millions of times. The comment section exploded with outrage. Thug. Criminal. Lock him up. The narrative was simple, clean, satisfying in its clarity. Another criminal stealing from those who protect and serve. Another example of lawlessness in a world that seemed increasingly chaotic. But stories are never that simple. And the truth, when it finally emerged, would shatter every assumption people had made about those 47 seconds of grainy footage. 2 hours after the theft, they found him. Not hiding, not running, not resisting. He was sitting in the stolen police cruiser in the parking lot of St. Mary's Hospital, 3 towns over. The car was intact except for the broken window. The gas tank was nearly empty. He had driven exactly where he needed to go, and then he had stopped. When the officers approached, weapons drawn, he stepped out slowly with his hands raised. His shirt was torn and bloody from the broken glass. His face was streaked with tears and exhaustion. But what struck the arresting officers most was his composure. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defiant. He was just empty. As they placed the handcuffs on his wrists, he asked only one question, his voice barely above a whisper. Did she make it? The officers looked at each other, confused. Did who make it? One of them asked. He closed his eyes and leaned against the police cruiser. My mother. Did she make it? They didn't understand. Not yet. But they would. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the metal table. Detective Sarah Martinez sat across from him, studying his face. She had seen every type of criminal in her 15 years on the force. The cocky ones who thought they were smarter than everyone else. The desperate ones who made stupid mistakes. The career criminals who treated arrest like a minor inconvenience. The violent ones who radiated danger even in shackles. But this young man was different. He sat perfectly still, his hands folded in front of him, staring at a spot on the table. His name was David Chen, according to his identification, 26 years old, no criminal record, not even a parking ticket. Why'd you steal a police vehicle? Detective Martinez asked, her voice steady but not unkind. He didn't look up, didn't blink. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. David, I need you to help me understand what happened tonight. You broke into a police car and drove it across 3 towns. That's a felony. Multiple felonies, actually. Grand theft auto, destruction of property, fleeing the scene. You're looking at serious time here. Still nothing. His breathing was shallow, controlled. His knuckles were white where his hands gripped each other. Detective Martinez leaned forward. David, talk to me. What were you thinking? Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet, hollow, like it was coming from somewhere very far away. Because the ambulance didn't come. Because her lips turned blue. Because I didn't know what else to do. The detective frowned. The ambulance? What ambulance? I called them. I called and called. But they didn't come. And she was dying, right there on the kitchen floor. And I didn't know what else to do. Detective Martinez stepped out of the interrogation room and called for backup information. Within an hour, the picture began to emerge piece by piece, like a puzzle that revealed a completely different image than what everyone had assumed. David Chen lived alone with his mother, Lin Chen, in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. She was 58 years old, a former seamstress who had worked double shifts for 20 years to put David through college. He had graduated with honors, gotten a good job at an engineering firm, and had been taking care of her ever since her diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors had given her 6 months. That was 8 months ago. The neighbors described them as quiet, kind people. Mrs. Chen tended a small garden on their fire escape, growing vegetables that she shared with anyone who asked. David was often seen helping elderly residents with their groceries, shoveling snow in winter, always polite, always respectful. The building manager, a woman named Rosa Gutierrez, was particularly fond of them. They were like family to me, she told the police. When my husband died last year, Lynn brought me soup every day for a month, and David fixed my heater when the landlord wouldn't call a repairman. Good people, the best people. But tonight, something had gone terribly wrong. Detective Martinez returned to the interrogation room with a clearer picture, but still missing crucial pieces. She sat down across from David again, this time with a gentler demeanor. David, I need you to tell me exactly what happened tonight. Start from the beginning. He looked up for the first time, his eyes red and swollen. She was having a good day. We watched her favorite movie. She ate almost a whole bowl of soup. She was laughing. His voice broke slightly. She was laughing at something on the television. And then she just collapsed. What did you do? I called 911 immediately. I told them she was unconscious, that she had cancer, that she needed help right away. They said an ambulance was on the way. And then I waited. I held her hand and I waited. But she was getting worse. Her breathing was so shallow. Her lips started turning blue. And no one came. Detective Martinez made notes, her expression growing more serious. How long did you wait? I don't know. It felt like forever. I called again. They said the ambulance was coming, but it wasn't. She was dying, and no one was coming. So you decided to steal a police car? David's hands trembled. I didn't decide anything. I was just desperate. I knew there was a police substation 2 blocks away. I thought maybe they would have keys to something, anything that could get at her to the hospital fast. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just knew I had to do something. But why didn't you call for a taxi or ask a neighbor to drive you? I don't have money for a taxi, and Mrs. Gutierrez doesn't drive. The other neighbors weren't home. It was just me, and she was dying, and I couldn't just watch her die. Detective Martinez left the interrogation room again, this time with a growing sense of unease. She called the emergency services dispatch to verify David's story. The conversation with the dispatcher was brief, but illuminating. Yeah, we have a record of calls from that address, the dispatcher confirmed. 2 calls, both around 9:30 p.m., both requesting an ambulance for an unconscious cancer patient. What was the response time? Well, that's the thing. We were dealing with a multi-car accident on the interstate. All available units were tied up. The calls were logged, but we couldn't dispatch anyone immediately. How long before you could have gotten someone there? Hard to say. Maybe an hour, maybe 2. It was a busy night. Detective Martinez felt a chill. Did anyone call him back to explain the delay? No, we don't usually do that. People call, we dispatch when we can. That's the procedure. After hanging up, Detective Martinez stared at her notes. The story was becoming clearer, but also more complicated. She decided to dig deeper. She called the hospital where David had been found. A nurse named Jennifer Walsh answered the phone. "Oh yes, I remember him," Jennifer said when Martinez described David. "He arrived here around 11 p.m. in a police car. He was carrying an elderly Asian woman. She was unconscious, barely breathing. He was crying, begging us to help her." What was her condition? Critical. She had gone into cardiac arrest, probably from the stress of her advanced cancer. "We got her stabilized, but—" Jennifer paused. "She didn't make it. She passed away about an hour after they arrived." Detective Martinez closed her eyes. Did he know? Yes, he was with her when she died. He held her hand and talked to her in what I think was Mandarin. It was heartbreaking. I've been a nurse for 20 years, and I've never seen grief like that. There was still something that didn't add up. Detective Martinez returned to the dispatch center and asked to speak with the supervisor. A tired-looking man named Bill Harrison met her in a small office filled with monitors and coffee cups. "I need to understand something about the calls from 847 Maple Street tonight," she said. "The David Chen case." Bill pulled up the records on his computer. "Yeah, I see them here. 2 calls for an ambulance, both around 9:30. But here's what I don't understand. The suspect claims he called multiple times, but you only have 2 calls on record." Bill frowned and clicked through several screens. "That's weird. Let me check the system logs." He typed for several minutes, his frown deepening. "This is strange. I'm showing attempted calls from that number throughout the evening, but most of them didn't go through." "What do you mean they didn't go through?" "It looks like the phone was having network issues. The calls were initiated but dropped before they could complete the connection. Only 2 actually made it through to our system." Detective Martinez felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "Can you tell me more about that?" "Well, it's not uncommon in that area. There's a cell tower down for maintenance, and some of the older apartments have poor reception. If someone was calling from inside an apartment in that building, they might have trouble getting a clear connection." "So he could have been trying to call for help multiple times, but the calls weren't getting through?" "Exactly. And from his perspective, it would seem like he was calling and calling, but no one was responding." Detective Martinez returned to the interrogation room with a heavy heart. She had all the pieces now, and the picture they formed was devastating. David was still sitting in the same position, staring at the table. But now she saw him differently, not as a criminal, but as a son who had watched his mother die while frantically trying to get help that never came. "David," she said softly, "I need to ask you about your phone." He looked up, confused. "My phone? Were you having trouble with your calls tonight? Were they not going through?" His expression changed, a look of recognition and fresh pain crossing his face. Yes. I kept trying to call. The phone would ring once or twice and then cut out. I thought maybe they were hanging up on me. I thought maybe they didn't believe me." "How many times did you try to call?" "I don't know. Dozens? I called until the battery died. I called until my fingers were numb. I called until I couldn't think of anything else to do." Detective Martinez nodded. "David, I need to tell you something. Your mother died at the hospital tonight." "I'm sorry." He nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. "I know. I was there. I held her hand. I also need to tell you that we've confirmed your story. You did try to call for help. Multiple times. The system failed you. He looked at her with hollow eyes. Does it matter now? She's gone. It matters because you're not a criminal. You're a son who did everything he could to save his mother. What you did tonight wasn't about breaking the law. It was about trying to save a life when the system that was supposed to help you failed. Over the next several hours, as word of the true story spread, the narrative began to shift. The same social media that had condemned David Chen, sight unseen, began to tell a different story. The comments that had once called for his imprisonment now expressed sympathy, outrage at the system, and calls for justice. But the damage was already done. Lin Chen was gone. David had lost the only family he had left. And the trauma of watching her die while desperately trying to get help that never came would stay with him forever. Detective Martinez worked through the night, gathering statements, confirming facts, building a case not for prosecution, but for understanding. She spoke with neighbors who described David as a devoted son who had sacrificed his own social life to care for his mother. She talked to his employer, who confirmed that he had been taking unpaid leave to handle her medical appointments. She reviewed medical records that painted a picture of a young man who had been dealing with an impossible situation with grace and determination. The more she learned, the more tragic the story became. David had been eligible for emergency medical assistance programs that could have provided better care for his mother, but he didn't know about them. He had been struggling financially, working overtime to pay for her medications, but too proud to ask for help. He had been isolated, carrying the burden of her illness alone. He never complained, Rosa Gutierrez told Detective Martinez. I would see him coming home from work, then going straight to the pharmacy, then to the grocery store. He looked so tired all the time. But when I asked if he needed anything, he would always say they were fine. He was protecting her dignity, you know? He didn't want people to know how bad it was. As Detective Martinez compiled her report, she began to see the theft of the police car not as a crime, but as a symptom of a much larger problem. The emergency medical system had failed David and his mother when they needed it most. The social safety net had gaps that had left them struggling in silence. The community, despite its good intentions, hadn't been aware of the depth of their need. She also learned about the police substation where David had found the car. It was a small facility, mostly used for administrative purposes. The car he had stolen was supposed to be secured, but a maintenance worker had left it unlocked after a routine service check. It was another small failure in a system full of them. The officer whose car had been stolen, Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, was surprisingly understanding when Detective Martinez briefed him. Look, I'm not happy about someone breaking into my cruiser, he said, but if it was my mother dying on the kitchen floor, and I thought taking that car might save her life, I don't know. I might have done the same thing. The district attorney's office faced a difficult decision. Technically, David had committed several serious crimes. The law was clear about that, but the circumstances were extraordinary, and the public sentiment was shifting rapidly as the full story emerged. District Attorney Rebecca Stone called Detective Martinez into her office the next morning. What's your recommendation on this case? I think prosecuting this young man would be a miscarriage of justice, Martinez replied. He's not a criminal. He's a victim of circumstances beyond his control. But he did break the law. Multiple laws. Yes, he did. But sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing. This is one of those times. Stone reviewed the case file, the media coverage, and the statements from the community. After several hours of deliberation, she made her decision. The charges against David Chen were dropped. The announcement was made at a press conference, attended by local media, community leaders, and several dozen supporters who had gathered outside the courthouse. While Mr. Chen's actions were technically illegal, District Attorney Stone explained, the circumstances surrounding this case are extraordinary. He was a son desperately trying to save his mother's life when the systems that should have helped him failed. Prosecuting him would serve no purpose other than to compound a tragedy. But there was no celebration, no victory lap. David sat alone in the hallway outside the courtroom, his hands shaking as he processed the news. Detective Martinez found him there, staring at the floor. "You're free to go," she said softly. He looked up at her with empty eyes. "Free to go where? She's gone. I have nothing left. You have your life. You have time to grieve, to heal, to find a way forward. I failed her. I couldn't save her. No, David. The system failed both of you. You did everything you could. You fought for her until the very end." In the days that followed, David became an unlikely symbol of both the fragility of life and the failures of the systems designed to protect it. The story sparked conversations about emergency medical response times, about the challenges facing caregivers, about the isolation of families dealing with terminal illness. A fundraising campaign started by Rosa Gutierrez raised enough money to cover Lin Chen's funeral expenses and give David a small cushion as he figured out his next steps. The engineering firm where he worked offered him extended bereavement leave and counseling services. The police department reviewed their security protocols and installed better locks on their vehicles. The emergency medical service implemented new procedures for communicating with callers about delays and alternative options. But for David, these changes felt hollow. They might help someone else in the future, but they couldn't bring his mother back. 3 weeks after the incident, Detective Martinez visited David at his apartment. She found him packing boxes, preparing to move. "Where will you go?" she asked. "I don't know. Somewhere else, somewhere without so many memories." The apartment felt empty already. Lin Chen's small garden on the fire escape had withered. Her favorite chair sat covered with a sheet. Her medical equipment had been returned to the rental company, leaving behind only the faint impression of a life lived and lost. "I keep thinking about that night," David said as he folded his mother's clothes. "I keep wondering if I had done something different, if I had been smarter, if I had been faster. You did everything you could." "Did I? I stole a police car. I broke the law. I traumatized those officers. I created a scene. Maybe if I had just waited, maybe if I had tried something else." Detective Martinez sat down across from him. "David, I've been a cop for 15 years. I've seen people do terrible things for selfish reasons. I've seen people hurt others out of greed, anger, hatred. But I've never seen anyone break the law for a more pure reason than you did that night. You weren't thinking about yourself. You weren't thinking about the consequences. You were thinking about saving your mother's life. But I failed. No, you loved. You loved her so much that you were willing to risk everything to try to save her. That's not failure. That's the most human thing there is." As David prepared to leave town, Detective Martinez reflected on the case that had changed her understanding of crime, punishment, and justice. The video that had started it all was still circulating on social media, but now it was accompanied by the full story. The comments had shifted from condemnation to sympathy to calls for systemic change. But the real impact was harder to measure. How many people, having heard David's story, would be more likely to check on elderly neighbors? How many would be more understanding of desperate actions taken in desperate circumstances? How many would think twice before rushing to judgment based on incomplete information? The case had also revealed uncomfortable truths about the systems society depends on. The emergency medical system that couldn't respond fast enough. The social safety net that missed a family in need. The communication systems that failed when they were needed most. The community that cared but didn't know how to help. Sometimes, Detective Martinez wrote in her final report, the crime isn't about breaking the law. It's about the circumstances that force good people to break the law. David Chen didn't steal a police car because he was a criminal. He stole it because he was a son who loved his mother more than he feared the consequences of his actions. 6 months later, Detective Martinez received a postcard from Seattle. It was a simple message, starting over. Thank you for seeing the truth. D. She kept the postcard on her desk as a reminder that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about understanding. Sometimes it's about recognizing that good people can do bad things for the right reasons. Sometimes it's about admitting that the system failed before the person did. The stolen police car case, as it came to be known, became a teaching example in law enforcement academies. Not about crime and punishment, but about the importance of looking beyond the surface, of understanding context, of recognizing that every action has a story behind it. And sometimes, those stories change everything. David Chen never returned to his hometown, but his story lived on as a reminder that in a world full of snap judgments and quick condemnations, the truth is often more complex, more human, and more heartbreaking than we first imagined. The 47 seconds of video that had started it all told a story of theft and lawlessness, but the full story told something else entirely. A story of love, loss, desperation, and the terrible choices we sometimes have to make when the systems we trust fail us in our darkest moments. Sometimes the crime isn't about breaking the law. Sometimes it's about what breaks us first.